Hi, I'm Nick from TbT, www.airrifletuning.com, and this is my video on the TX200 by Air Arms. How to take it apart, what to do inside of it, and which of the TbT tuning kits is the best option for you. This is my TX200. It is a 2.2 Hunter carbine, the HC with the shorter barrel. It's a Mark III. Before I start taking it apart, Marks 1, 2 and 3. The way to tell them apart is look in this part here. If you have no notches, you have a Mark 1. If you have 3 notches that are equally spaced, you have a Mark 2. And if you have 3 notches, 2 together and 1 on its own, then it's a Mark 3. The Mark 3 is by far the most common, but you'll need to know this when choosing your kit. So make a note of that first. And now let's take it apart. It's quite simple to take apart. There are 4 screws holding it together, 2 at the front on the stock and 2 at the back by the trigger. If you've got a Prosport, this video will be useful. It does vary slightly. There are a couple of bits that are different, but on the whole it is the same principle for taking it apart and same principle for putting the things inside. It takes the same kits as the 200. Take those ones. They're all with the smaller hex key, Allen key, and then the one in front of the trigger guard is the larger one. There we go. And coming out, not yet. A couple more turns. There we are. And put the stock safely aside. Okay. The next thing to do is to remove the spring and all the internals from the gun. And what we need to do that is remove this bolt. This is holding everything together. So on a strong surface, a bit of downward pressure to take up the spring tension, and then that will turn. Now, if it's a factory fresh gun, it may well be you need a spanner to undo that the first time, but after that I just keep it finger tight. It's all it needs to be. So that comes out all the way towards the end. You can feel, if you push down, you can feel the movement, so you know roughly how much tension there's going to be on the spring. So you get that out and just let it out under control like that. The trigger unit comes away and that's it. Next we take the spring out. Now usually you'd have the spring, the guides and stuff like that. It's been a long time since this has had standard stuff in it. I don't have the standard parts anymore, but you would normally find usually a very poorly fitting steel rear guide and a big heavy metal weight at the front. In the Mark III, it's got a very weak spring to keep the power down under 12 foot-pounds. That's why you have so many different size weights at the front. Depending on how poor your gun was performing from the factory, the larger the weight you'll have in there, and sometimes even power washers as well, just to get much power. This is because the Mark III has a longer stroke, and to keep it below 12 foot-pounds, it means they have to put a weak spring in it to make sure the piston travels slowly enough that it doesn't go over power. So all the gubbins that comes out there gets set aside. We're going to replace it. Next we need to take out this piston and the compression tube, and to do that we need to take off this cocking arm first. It's held on here by circlips, so with a very small tool just nip that circlip, pop him over there somewhere safe, and then we've got to push the pin through. Top tip, just break that because it's got tension on that pin and it's difficult to pull out, but once you've got that bit off, it just literally falls out. That comes off of there. The cocking arm is safe. Slide this arrangement backwards until you can take out the cocking shoe in the widened part there, and then we can just continue pushing everything out of the back. There's your compression tube, and then inside of it there's your piston. That's it. The gun is apart. So your gun is apart. Which kit should you fit to it? We have 3 options available at TbT for the TX200 and the Prosport now, all of which use our premium springs because they are much better than the one that was in there. If you're after sub 12 foot-pounds, you're in the UK for example, or you're in the States and you want to shoot competitively in the sub 12 foot-pound group, there is a Maxi Pro kit which has one of our springs, fitted guides, little bag with grease and washers, a pot of bum slide, and the magic ingredient, a short stroke extension. You'll remember I mentioned marks 1, 2 and 3. The history there, the story with that and how it relates to this. The Mark 1 came out and it had an 86mm stroke. It was fantastic. It's perfect for sub 12 foot-pounds. The piston travels basically 86mm and the bore is 25mm. So using science we can work out how many cc's of air that was. But it was perfect for 12 foot-pounds, whatever it was. So the piston could travel along smartly, 12 foot-pounds, crisp firing cycle, job done. Mark 2 came out, exactly the same stroke but with an anti-bear trap. Brilliant, because this is a fantastic gun with an added safety feature. Wonderful. Air Arms thought this gun's good. We could sell more if we sell it to Americans, but Americans want power, so what can we do? They increased the stroke from 86mm to 99. This now means that the gun is a 15 foot-pound gun, which is great if you want 15 foot-pound. It's crisp, it's lovely, it shoots superbly. But if you want to use it under 12 foot-pounds, in the UK for example, you're suddenly compromised because your piston is travelling further, but it has to travel slower to keep the power down because it's got more air to push out, so it needs to go slower. So they've put in a weaker spring, and because there's a weaker spring in there, the firing cycle is just all over the place. I mean, some people like it, some people don't. It's not conducive to accurate shooting because it's hold critical. You know, the hold sensitivity on it is quite extreme. So when the Mark III came out, a guy called John Budd, who's a friend of mine, a very, very clever man, and also a very competitive shooter, he thought, I love my Mark II, I love my Mark III. My Mark III doesn't shoot as well as my Mark II, so he went to another friend of mine called Phil Price. Neil Price, not Phil Price. Phil Price is the editor. Neil Price, who you might know him as UK Neil, he used to write for Air Gunner magazine. He used to do the technical articles, taking guns apart and improving them, things like that. So John went to him and said, I want to change my Mark III to shoot like a Mark II, and what they came up with was a short stroke extension that attaches, you remove the seal on the front of the piston, you attach this on in its place, and it increases the length of the piston by 13mm, which reduces the stroke by 13mm, takes it back to 86mm, the same as the Mark 1 and the Mark II. It's very simple, effective, you can do it yourself, it's not expensive. He made his first one back in the 90s, about 25 years ago, in the late 90s, for John Budd. Then he started making them and was selling them, and Blackpool Air Rifles were selling them for him and things like that. And when he came to retiring, he said to me, look Nick, these are good, you'll sell some of these. So he showed me the extension and explained how they work, things like that. So I started making them. All I did was adapted it. His original design had a dovetail on the front, the same as the piston, so you reuse the air arm seal. I changed it so that it now takes a 25mm parachute seal, a Viarc one, which is slightly more efficient. But other than that, this is the same design that was designed by John Budd and Neil Price back in the 90s, so about 25 years ago. It still works just as well as it ever has. So the Maxi Pro kit is going to reduce your stroke, so your piston can now travel faster over a shorter distance, but it will still do 12 foot-pounds. Ideally you want your gun somewhere 10.5 to 11 foot-pounds in 177. That's kind of where most people find the compromise between recoil, accuracy and hold sensitivity. And if you want the most from your gun, that is the kit to get. Below that we've got the Maxi kit, which is the same but without the short stroke and without the bum slide. Okay, so we're left with a spring with fitted guides, slip washer, power washers, little sachet of grease. Also, these ones should mention they come with breech seals as well, a new set of breech seals, just in case. The breech seals are just little O-rings down inside there. You can pick them out with a bent pin and replace them. If they don't need replacing, just keep the seals to one side. I just put them in there because it's something that is a useful thing to have. Okay, so the Maxi kit is one of our premium springs, fitted guides, power washers, things like that. We do it in two different powers now. We do the 31 coil spring, which is this one here, which is the full power. That will give you approximately 15 foot-pounds in 2.2, maybe more, maybe less. Every gun is different. Or we do the 29 coil version, which is the UK spec. So when you go onto the page and look at the maxi kits, you'll see you'll see full power, and you will see UK spec. Now, this is intended for less than 12 foot-pounds. It does not guarantee it will be less than 12 foot-pounds. Every time you take the gun apart, you should run it over a chrono to make sure it is still legal. Having a chrono is, you know, you really do need one. It's the best diagnostic tool. If your accuracy goes out the window, first thing you do, run it over the chrono. Has the power dropped? Is it all over the place? That will tell you if it's a seal or not. So get a chrono. Lecture over. Anyway, there we are. So we have the Maxi Pro kit with the short stroke and the bum slide, and the spring and the guides, or just the spring and the guides in the Maxi kit in a UK or a full power spec. So now we come to rebuilding the gun. Inside the little bag here, as well as some grease, you'll find 3 washers. 1 slip washer with a small hole, and 2 power washers with a large hole. Now the power washers are to go onto the rear guide. Well, in fact, once you've taken the rear guide out, in the box you'll find your flange, 30mm flange with a recess in the back. So that passes through there, so the little collar on the rear guide sits inside the recess on the flange. So that is it rebuilt. And if you need to increase the power, these slide on there, and then the spring can go on the front of that. But you don't really want to be doing that. They're more, if you've found your gun is over and you've reduced your spring to bring it back down, but you take it too far, these are what you use to bring it up. You shouldn't really be putting them in there straight off, because you don't know where the power's going to be, so it's better to rebuild without them first. So put the flange onto there, that back onto there. Now the guides, if they're tight, they may need a twist. It's always clockwise, whether it's in or out, clockwise and pull at the same time, open to coils and out it will pop. And our slip washer, he goes into the piston first. So if you imagine this is the piston, well, don't have to imagine, it is the piston, isn't it? So that goes in the front of the piston, and then with some bum slide on there, some on the spring. Another thing with this, the piston's a closed face piston, so you can put a thin coating of grease onto the spring to deaden any vibration. It's not going to escape from the piston and create these then, so that's good. That goes into there like that, and everything is now running off this latch rod instead of thrashing around inside of there, and you put it back together. Every time the piston comes out the compression tube, you need to degrease the compression tube. Even though you may use just a tiny amount, what the piston seal will do is scrape it all off the walls and push it all to the bottom, where it will diesel away for the next 100 shots. So every time the piston comes out of this, you have to degrease this. I use brake carburetor cleaner, the aerosol stuff, to make sure you dry it thoroughly afterwards. So when you're greasing this up, it's running on Delrin bands at the front and back, so you just need some bum slide there and some bum slide there, and then that goes back together. Oh, and a little bit on the seal, just on the edge. You don't want it on the face, just around the edge of the seal. And then when you come to put this in, just underneath there you want a layer of bum slide there, because that's at the bottom what it's sitting on, and then a ring of it around the back of the skirt here. Everything goes back together the opposite way of how we put it in there. Just when you come to the cocking shoe, this part will be there, and it's time to put the cocking shoe back in. Just a little bit of bum slide or grease on there, just so it gives it a little bit of something to sit on in that recess rather than just metal on metal. Then you put it back together and test the power. If you have any questions while you're fitting these, or before you buy a kit, or is anything you're not sure of, email me or ring me. I'm always here to help. But this is the easiest gun to take apart. It's a fantastic quality rifle, and it can be made even better for not very much money. So yes, crack on, see what happens, see what you get out of it, let me know how you feel about it, and like I say, any questions during fitting, just give me a ring and we'll go over it. But thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.